sum this up very briefly. This is the FBI memo concerning James Spencer, not to be confused with landlord John Spencer. James Spencer was this time unemployed car salesman, but he was employed from February to August 1961 at Dumas Milner Chevrolet Company. Now, February to August 1961 happens to be a time when Lee Oswald is in Russia, as everybody knows. But it's also a time when Kerry Thornley is in New Orleans. Spencer advised that an individual who identified himself as Lee Oswald, and here's one of the most curious things in the case so far, with the address Magazine Street, attempted to purchase a car through him at the Dumas Milner Chevrolet. He does not recall the date, but he does recall that he was employed there from February to August 61. He states that Oswald impressed him as a character, spoke favorably of Cuba, appeared to have been enthusiastic about Castro. It's a routine like it could have been Oswald, except it's in the spring of 61 when Thornley's here and not Oswald.
Do you have any indication of where Thornley was living in 61?
We have, in the original Thornley file, I have not only a breakdown of his residences, I think, which I made after the grand jury testimony. I had him go through every place he lived, but every place he worked. If I could somehow find that, if we can get the grand jury testimony, it'll be useful. Because just remember, one of the places for a while was Fox Film Company. Another place was as a waiter or bus boy at the St. Charles Hotel. He moved around almost like Larry Crayford moved around the country, except he's staying in the New Orleans area. But anyway, this identifies the memo sufficiently. It's the kind of thing that you have to read to appreciate. One more point. The FBI agent writing it says, a few days ago, while Spencer was looking through his billfold, he found a business card which he'd used while employed as a salesman by Dumas Milner in New Orleans. On the back of the card was a notation in Spencer's handwriting, Lee Oswald, Magazine Street. Now, of course, this is the kind of thing that we've been encountering for a long time at an early stage and in our investigation, but somewhere along the line, I think it became apparent to us that this was too consistent to be a mistake. This also occurs with regard to Bolton Ford. The name Lee Oswald is used in 62, and it also occurs again with regard to an arrest out on the lakefront. I guess I'll come across that, which occurs in 62 or 61. Now, we know Oswald is in Russia then, but that's not the point any longer. The approach of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was to say Oswald is in Russia, therefore this is irrelevant. I'm suggesting that a more productive approach is this is too systematic to be a mistake in memory here or there. Someone in New Orleans in 61 and 62 is using Lee Oswald's name. On to the next point. And I might add, I think the leading candidate for the reasons given would be Kerry Thornley. Incidentally, we know that there would be at least two people in the quasi-intelligence substructure connected with the Cubans and Bannister, who in 19... One would be Kerry Thornley. They were in the same CAP unit, something we established a long time ago after extensive effort. I might add that a possible third one could be Clay Shaw, because he used to hang around at a homosexual bar on Exchange Place, which was across the street from where Oswald lived when he went to high school, but we have never been able to establish that they met. In any case, Ferry and Thornley in 61 are here, and no Oswald. We have, oh, here's another one you may not have. Yeah.
Go ahead. I have to make a run so that
Okay, here's another one. Before you go, you may not have this on your list, but
I'll be back in 25 minutes. I'm just going to go pick up something.
do you have John Becker, the two Cubans and the Americans coming into the traffic division?
Yeah.
To get a parade permit?
Yeah, we got that.
No, I mean on your on the chronological list.
No.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That we're going to have more and more things to add. It's just mentioning in passing. This the time, place for this incident is March 1962. We're working in we're working out a chronological listing of the appearances of individuals using the name of Oswald while he's still in Russia, and individuals subsequently who apparently are not Oswald but are playing Oswald in scenarios after he gets back. And we might find a time pattern in which the existence of certain times or certain gaps will be productive. Anyway, FBI memo, dated 11/30/63. John Becker advised, as you recall, two Cubans and an American coming into the traffic division while he was in charge for the purpose of securing a parade permit. He placed the time of this incident as being in March 1962. In March 1962, Lee Oswald is still in Dallas. You coming back?
Yeah.
Okay. He's still in Dallas, Texas. He doesn't come to New Orleans until the following month. So again, this is a possible Carrie Thornley item, and that's a good one to check out early. LJ?
Mm-hmm.
Because in a case like one of the good possibilities, parenthetically, one of the good possibilities about these 1961 and 1962 items when Oswald was not here is the individuals who are being interviewed probably have not acquired that false conviction that it was Oswald. For example, when you get to Dallas just before the assassination and you have somebody shooting on your range with a Mannlicher Carcano, and you've been telling people for 14 years that Lee Oswald was using your range, and if it actually turned out to be a Carrie Thornley, an awful lot of people would really be disappointed to find out it wasn't Oswald. Besides, they would have convinced themselves by rote and repetition. But in a case like this, the ordinary FBI agent, well, certainly in the case of 61, would tell him Oswald was not in the country in 61, so he wouldn't have acquired the fixation, and I'm suggesting would be freer to look at a picture and see if it might be Thornley. The people you talk to in Dallas when that time comes, some of them are going to have a fixation that it was Oswald, even though it wasn't. But it couldn't have been downtown Lincoln Park. It couldn't have been the shooting ranges. But by now, some people will be convinced it was. They rewrite their own history just like the government does. But I think we have a better shot at getting an identification of the false Oswald in these 1961-62 cases. Mr. Becker stated that he had seen photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald, and although he saw the individuals who applied for the permit, he could not say that one of them had been Oswald. Now that's a good witness. That's the kind you want to, you know, that's the kind who's got possibilities. That's the priority item. Well,
Remarkable.
Cliff, you see that pattern of they're using Oswald's name?
Yes, yeah.
It's people connected with the Cubans in the Bannister operation, which is another way of saying this intelligence or semi-intelligence substructure that is servicing the anti-Castro effort are using Oswald's name even though he's in Russia. And we know of only two people, for sure who are in New Orleans in 61 and early 62 who know the name Lee Oswald, and one is Kerry Thornley and the other is David Ferry, and both of them are quite apparently connected with this semi-intelligent substructure, whatever it may turn out to be. FBI memo dated 11/30/63, same date, again about the parade permit, but this is another person. This is an officer named Captain Wilfred Grusich, and after the arrest of Oswald in Dallas, after the assassination, the memo says he recalled an individual generally fitting the facial characteristics of Oswald, had been in the traffic division, which is Tulane and Broad, part of the police department here, with some Cubans to apply for a permit to parade. Captain Grusich stated, to go back down to the point, as best as he can recall, sometime in March 1962, 3 individuals came for the permit. So he confirms the general statement of Becker, that it's 2 Cubans plus somebody who's a non-Cuban, and the Cuban spoke very little English. The 3rd individual was an American who acted as the spokesman. Again, in March 1962, Oswald is not yet in New Orleans, but Kerry Thornley is, and that will be checked out. There's another man at the bottom, of an additional witness. If I didn't point it out before, I might call your attention out there. It says, Captain Grusich said he had discussed this incident with Sergeant George Dedual, who is assigned to the traffic division. And Dedual, or whatever it is, felt that he had also seen either Oswald or someone who closely resembled him in the traffic division attempting to secure a parade permit. So now we have a 3rd witness there, which is pretty good, especially with 2 of them as police officers, because they're more likely to remember faces. But now we have 3 witnesses about the American with the 2 Cubans in March 62. So that is worth an early checkout.
Dito's still in the police department. Gross is a retired captain.
Oh, good. Start off with Dito, but that's a hell of a good beginning. But anyway, one is clear. That pattern is too strong to be an accident. That's we just hit this the other day. I've forgotten about that. We picked that up years ago, but it even gets stronger later with Bolton Ford. Here's one more item I might mention. That Grusich has shown a photograph of Lee Oswald taken August 9, 63 by the New Orleans Police Department. That's when he was arrested. Why the hell does the date August 10th suddenly become important? It was a phone call somebody made on August 10th. I came across it the other night and was trying to, let me write something down to myself here.
June 10th?
Huh?
Is that a June 10th phone call?
No, no, that's the June 10th phone call is Jack Ruby's 2 calls to Fort Worth. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about something on August 10th that I came across in reading someone else, Thornley or somebody. Oswald was arrested on the 9th, and I was trying to incidentally, mentioning Kerry Thornley, we don't...
When was that incident? 62?
Which incident? Oh, you mean the permits?
Yeah.
The permits, the attempt to get a permit was in March 62.
Thornley was arrested in...
Thornley was arrested in August of 62. That's what I was about to get to that. That's something that we forgot to go into in front of John, and we'll include it. Well, we'll include it now.
August 13th,
Yeah. We'll go into that as soon as I finish this one last sentence of this current Grusich. Grusich was shown, just so you can get this line, Grusich was shown a photograph of Lee Oswald taken August 9th when he was arrested, 63. Captain Grusich stated that although he still felt that Oswald had been the one he was referring to as having been there with the Cubans, he could not state this to be a fact. So he has an open mind as to who the young American male was, and it's just as well since Oswald was still in Dallas in March. Now, I've just been talking with Gayton about another incident which occurred in 1962. In this case, it's not an unidentified person, but it is Kerry Thornley, who was arrested on the 13th of August 1962. And the way this developed was, I think, largely by phone, but I sent Gayton a 50-page gratuitous affidavit of Thornley along with my analysis, and he agreed with me that Thornley had bumped into far too many people and was now no longer Joe Smith. And so and this stimulated my interest. I think more than I made a B of I check, and damn if we didn't come up with an arrest for Kerry W. Thornley. And he was living in the French Quarter. We do have his address there, although I don't have it in the book in front of me.
1717 Barracks.
No, not 17, it's 717, isn't it?
717.
Yeah, I'm sorry. 717
Barracks.
Barracks, and the charge that Thornley's arrested for, while Oswald's still in Russia, is a fascinating charge, but it doesn't tell us all we want to know. It is violating a city ordinance by posting a leaflet or putting a poster on a telephone post at 3 in the morning at the corner of Governor Nichols and Royal or something like that. That area.
You did a follow-up check on it, if you recall. I don't have.
It's in that area. It's Governor Nichols or something, but that's in the French Quarter. But the point is, you can almost smell the indication that he got to be down here and involved in anti-Castro activity. And here he is finally he's got something in his hands with print on it, which would certainly be most useful to us. And he's putting it on the poster and he's arrested. And we locate the two arresting officers, and they can't recall what's on the poster. They vaguely remember the arrest, but they cannot remember what was on the poster. So, unless...
Perhaps you could give that to LJ to follow up, because this is recent stuff, right? You just read locating those two.
Yeah, well, Steve Bordelon talked to the... I'll have to locate it, but Steve Bordelon talked to the arresting officers, and they couldn't remember a darn thing about what was on the poster, but I felt dissatisfied about that for this reason. I know that was a long time ago, and we're talking to them in 1977, asking them to remember what was on the poster in 1962, which is a pretty heavy request. But on the other hand, this had to be an unusual situation because it is in the middle of the French Quarter at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if he'd been arrested for being drunk, an officer could hardly remember that 6 months later because that happens so often in the quarter. But how often do you make an arrest for an ordinance that's so seldom violated as putting a poster on a telephone post? I'm just saying it's very unusual. And you might remember it at the end of your career because maybe it would only happen once.
What about the affidavit, maybe? What about the affidavit?
Well, they don't have affidavits for, I'm just trying to think,
The system back then?
I don't think they have affidavits for a minor ordinance.
City ordinances never...
No, I sent for the affidavit. And they couldn't find it at municipal court, and apparently they didn't have one. But we found the arrest slip, which is probably what the judge makes his, handles as an affidavit. Is that what they do with very minor ordinances now?
Well, now they make an affidavit, but back then, the arrest slip would come in, like,
And the arrest slip has the essentials on it,
right,
as far as the judge is concerned.
as far as the judge is concerned.
Well, in other words, that was so minor that, hell, I don't even know if they had a trial. I can't, do you recall anything like $10?
He was arrested for $15 for 15 days he was given.
Hey, I know what we forgot to check out. We forgot to check out the judge. The arrest slip would not necessarily have the court is going to, because it's made out earlier. And some of those judges aren't geniuses, but other judges out there are pretty damn bright. Who were municipal judges in '62? Because this is unusual enough. A lawyer might remember somebody in the middle of the night if there was an unusual legend on it. Especially if it related to the Cubans, and within a year, a man who is handing out fair play for Cuba supposedly shoots the president. It might have triggered his memory. And if you have a bright lawyer like if Lou Trent, although he's primarily traffic, if he was sitting, there's an excellent chance that one of the judges would have had their memory triggered by Oswald's activity if it were about Cubans.
All right, we can check back then and see by the time of arrest whose court it went to, because it went by times. In other words, whatever time the arrest was made,
The arrest was made at 3 in the morning.
All right, that would make the section of court be night court.
But who was there at 62?
62 was the old man.
Somebody who's undoubtedly dead now.
I don't think he's dead. I don't think he died. Glancy took his place. Sat on the bench at night. Yeah, I got his name on the tip of my tongue. Can't think of it.
Not Harold Moore. He'd been dead
No,
for years.
no, Oh, jeez. Lived across the river.
Oh, the crazy judge.
Yeah, he was for
Crazy as a
years.
bedbug. Oh, are you kidding?
Another.
Oh, there's never been a judge like Babylon.
Babylon.
Babylon is...
But you want to know what he's so crazy? He's so crazy he may remember that.
Babylon is just the kind of guy who might remember that. There's no question, because he's nuts.
And I'm going to tell you something else we could check. Go back into the archives and get the property book. They may have listed the evidence on property.
Oh, that's great. You want to...
What I'm thinking about is they may have taken the post, listed it as evidence on property, brought it to the court.
Well, they wouldn't take the telephone post, but you mean the...
No, I'm talking the poster.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you're out.
I would cut the post down and say, look, the damn thing stuck on his post right here. Did you see that?
I think I
Can't
got
call
a big
me a
case
liar.
here.
Can't call me a liar. It's a post. You know? No, but the idea does strike me that they may have listed it as evidence on their property book and went to the court and turned the property over as evidence.
I'll tell you. Let me tell you.
Because the poster would be evidence.
Well, okay, why don't you stop and make some notes on it while we remember all this, because if we leave it up to me to remind you, I'm so overloaded with things now, but take my word for it. The importance of this, the potential importance is hard to describe. If this turns out to be a Cuban legend of some sort, well, it ties Thornley in all the more strongly with the intelligence structure which is servicing the anti-Castro activity. And furthermore, Babylon is ignorant, when we say, for a judge in a sense, but he's brighter than the average witness. And almost any judge out there, now that I talk it out, if there was anything about Cuban about that sign, it's only a year later that Oswald's handing out fair play for Cuba pamphlets, and a few months after that you have the assassination, and a judge who handled an unusual case like a sign about Cubans in the middle of the night 15 months before would have his memory jarred. I think we have an excellent chance of picking it up with the judge. And I'll tell you briefly about Babylon, just it won't take more than a second. You haven't had any judges like this in New York. I'm not. Because it doesn't have to be recorded. But this guy is a great fisherman, and he's also fond of being a private detective. Maybe someday somebody can write a series of stories about a guy like. He likes to solve a case. He used to like to say. In other words, he was very racist. Very racist. I mean, he would make the average Mississippian look like he was. A liberal from the, what's a real liberal outfit? Ultra liberal. In other words, he automatically called any black boy. He could be 57 years old. I suppose a black lawyer, he would just make an exception, but otherwise he'd say, well, don't you have a copy, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me try. Let me see if I can make this
But I
more
thought for
productive.
Cliff's sake, you might want to point out the highlights of...
Okay. This was an important, the anecdote we didn't have time for, but the stop on the arrest could be important. You're going to check that out.
Yeah, I'll check one.
Okay, now here's a very important sheet of paper, and it's worth your looking at. Cliff, the Federal Bureau of Investigation report, Oscar W. DeLotte. Looks like DeSlat, but they call it DeLotte down here. Now, as I read this to you, and I'm going to read this one because this is one of the most important things in the whole case we've built down here. But as I read this to you, keep in mind that we have
Just do it to Cliff, because I've already heard.
Oh, okay. Good, good. We have an even more detailed statement we got from another employee of Bolton Ford named Fred Sewell. So this is just one witness. We have it supported by several witnesses. But as I describe it, you'll see how it begins to tie things more and more together. Tie the Cubans, the Friends of Democratic Cuba, who started off in the Bolton building with Bannister, and then later evolved into the Cuban Revolutionary Front and end up in the Newman building, again with Guy Bannister. Only at the Newman building, their address becomes 544 Camp, and Bannister's around the corner. It's one of my great discoveries, for which I'm sure the CIA is eternally grateful. And Oswald, with that little one stamp, one time he stamped at 544 Camp, really may have done this country a service, because that was the foot in the door. Okay, this is on him. That's progress of some kind.
The fact still remains. It's
Right.
the second one.
Let's go on, because this is important what he just brought in. Oh, incidentally, he mentioned that he said, did I have a file like this on Bannister? And I said, we just put together another light file, because it's just temporary. It's not complete. It's not everything we have, but we have somewhere around here. Everybody has a copy of the Bannister file, but just to show him the operation.
You have one?
Yeah, he has one. The only thing that's missing that you would want to look at the same time would be the index of Bannister's files.
Yeah, I looked at that.
You saw that.
Fantastic.
So you know it's not a private detective office.
It's definitely not.
It's important for you to see that, because otherwise you're just hearing me say, I don't think it's a private detective
Well,
office.
see, the reason that's one of the main reasons, one of the things I'm very interested in. I was telling LJ, we should be able to obtain all these files that his wife gave away, you know.
Absolutely. Some of those files, we want to see what's, now that you all could probably get them, I couldn't get anything. You've got to have some muscle, but if Mary Bannister still has any, I'm sure that she'd probably be cooperative. The Crime Commission...
I think she would be.
I think she would. My memory of her, she's a pretty nice person. I try and take an approach which does not indicate an incrimination of Bannister. I think that's very important.
You had the original. I'll put the original back.
Yes.
And I gave you two more.
Right.
What is this one? Oh, that's another one. I just gave you two, one for John and one for you. That's yours. Oh, this one.
No, that's
It is very important, and I just wanted LJ to hear this in case he should be the one that ends up communicating. It is very important that whoever communicates with Mary Bannister to see if she has any files left, because she may have some, handles it just right, because there should not be an inference naturally that it would be inculpatory to her husband. They were split and so forth. but she's a normal woman. She would be reluctant to do anything that blacken his reputation. I would suggest an approach be developed along the lines of a man named Dave Ferry that hung around your husband's place. Has turned out to be very interesting, and fortunately, your husband happened to be more organized than the average fellow, which may be a great break for us, because we believe that in his files will be material that will be very useful to him. In other words, you could almost make her feel good about it. And in the final analysis, who's going after him anyway? This is a very important one. Interview of one Fred Sewell. This is another guy in the Bolton Ford situation. I don't have to repeat it all, but the only thing is, oh, listen to this. I haven't seen this for some time. Mr. Sewell went on to relate that the man who came in with Oswald had a scar over his left eye, that he didn't have a Spanish name, but that he was a Cuban type. Now, that would be a good one to show Frank Sturgis to.
Well, my note on that, as you can see, is Rebel.
Well, I know you're voting for Rebel, I'm voting for Sturgis, but I mean...
Oh, Sturgis wasn't using Sturgis at that time.
Huh?
Sturgis wasn't using Sturgis.
I know, I'm not talking about the name, if it was Fiorini, but I'm saying apparently he didn't have his plastic surgery at the time that picture was taken. Let me see the picture. In other words, this guy may not be the escort I thought he was earlier, but he could well turn out to be the one buying the trucks, is what I'm saying. Listen to this description. The man who came in with Oswald, who I believe is probably Thornley, because this is in '61, had a scar over his left eye, but he didn't have a Spanish name, but that he was a Cuban type. This is a picture, Cliff, of
Yes.
yeah, in 1963, before the assassination, he had a scar on his left eye. But undoubtedly, he's not the only one in the world, so
Yes.
I don't want to get fixated on that, but I think he just ought to be checked out.
He doesn't fit the Cuban type description.
But you know better than me. I think you're right. He looks more Italian. But in any case, that was originally what was of major interest to me when we first got this, but I think the way things have developed, this is more interesting now with regard to the KT, the Thornley possibilities, because again, we have the Oswald business. The next page, you see questioning by Jim Alcock. And since he was one of the brighter lawyers in the office, that'll take care of itself when you read it. But you will see that they are here. This is even stronger. Fred Sewell, unlike Delott, remembers the full name of the man. And I met him at some point and recall him as an impressive person. Delott just remembered Oswald. Fred Sewell says, I think that Oscar Delott wrote that on there, Lee Oswald, wrote that on there, Lee Oswald. But he didn't use the Harvey, just Lee Oswald, if I remember right. Lee Oswald, yes, it's 6 years, of course. He represented himself as Lee Oswald. He's the man that spoke up and said, I'm the man handling the money. You ought to have my name, too. Well, whoever it is, it's somebody more important than Tom Beckham, who is, I think, a hanger-on that wouldn't be doing anything that heavy. On the other hand, looks to me like Thornley's more professional member of the club, and he might well be doing that. Let's see if we, on page 4, just to call your attention to it, Free Democrats of Cuba comes up again. He says they're talking about the Bolton Ford kind of contributing to the thing, giving him a good deal. And somewhere in here there's the inference that it's patriotic and for the government. And Sewell also describes the FBI coming in and picking up the bid with 2 pieces of plastic. So Oswald's name apparently was on it. And the rest of it, you can go through at your leisure. The point is made. Now here we come again. Damn it, it's just, we started off, when we first started kicking this around sometime last year, Gaten, and this isn't a result of a systematic checkout because I haven't had a chance, but the way this has ballooned since you and I first talked is really remarkable. Here we are. If you're looking at the interview with David Lusto, Levy Board Police Sergeant, you got that one?
I should have it in there. I got the whole time.
Okay, the point here is he starts off, he arrests a man who, this is a supplementary memo, which I better read the other one first because this is a follow-up. Yeah, this is a follow-up 6 weeks later. Chambers is very good, but this is just supplementary. So you should look next at the John Voles interview on March 1st to have it in order. Do you have that?
All right, which one you have first? I should have an order.
Come in.
John Voles.
We're gonna go.
Okay.
We'll leave the elevator.
You want to lock the front doors?
You want to lock the front door? Is Mr. Blackmore coming back? He
Oh,
said he
that's
was.
right. Well, then, why don't you lock this door
He
just
had
to...
keys. We don't have our keys.
No, then don't worry about it.
All right, I'll just leave everything open.
Okay.
You
Bye-bye.
can leave
See you
that
later.
door open, we can listen if anybody comes in.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
up, John's got the coffee.
Yeah, soon come.
Thank you for making the coffee.
Let me move ahead, okay? The John Voles interview is interesting again because of the steady repetitiveness of Lee Harvey Oswald surfacing when it doesn't seem to be the real Lee Oswald. And keep this in mind. If, with almost no investigative staff to speak of, myself and Chambers, as you notice, and I'll talk occasionally, Voles occasionally, and sometimes I run, almost no serious staff to speak of, and not concentrating on the times when Oswald isn't here. We're almost avoiding those initially because they kind of frustrate us. That's not what we're hunting for. If we, like 61, we know Oswald's in Russia, what are we going to do with that? But the point is, nevertheless, they keep flying in the damn window, and without a conscious effort to accumulate a structure, we've developed a structure of repetitive appearances of the name Lee Oswald when he isn't here. So what I'm getting to is, if that happens without an effort on our part to go out and find them, think how many times they use the name Lee Oswald during 61 and 62 that we don't even know about yet. If we see this many without having gone out in the field to try, in other words, I didn't say go out, Oswald in Russia in 61 and early 62, go out and see if you can find any instances of somebody using his name. That would be different. But we're not looking for that. But look how many we get anyway. What I'm saying is God knows how many other times they've done it. They must have been doing it all the time. It must have been kind of like an in joke for them. Maybe started by Ferry. But it's happening too often. Anyway, John Voles' report is an interview with Charles Noto, who remembers arresting Lee Harvey Oswald, he thinks, in October or November of 62. Well, in October or November of 62, Oswald has just moved from Fort Worth to Dallas, and it is unlikely that he's in New Orleans. But anyway, you have that lakefront arrest, and the next memo follows up. So the main thing is there are other names mentioned, also present, other patrolmen, superintendent, other people that you can check out. The next is a follow-up memo, David Lusto, and his memo is of special value. I would take a pen and do this. I underlined it. Just the underlined point is the whole thing. Lusto said, are you looking at Lusto?
Yeah, just turn it off.
Lusto said this could not have happened in 1962 because, as he remembers it, it was in 1961. So once again, we have Oswald, in quotes, appearing when the real Oswald's in Russia. And the next memo is Noto again, with a few more details, but he's vague about the year, but in any case, it doesn't seem to be Oswald. So now we come to another case of a non-Oswald, which you may not have on your list, because yeah, that's a much more comprehensive one. That's a questioning by Alcock. That's a questioning of Alcock, by Alcock of Sewell, that follows, and that will be much more detailed. He remembers the name Lee Oswald.
I want to conduct the first one.
Anyway, Cliff, the next thing is an FBI memo about the Jones Printing Company, interview with Myra Silver. And this is interesting because, again, it does not seem to check out to be the Oswald. She tells the Bureau that in May of 1963, by which time we know that Oswald is here, a person she understood to give his name as Osborne appears at the Jones Printing Company and orders 1,000 copies of a handbill, and there you see the handbill. He comes with an escort, as you see, with a follow-up. The handbills were made up on June 1 and locked up on June 3rd, and she says Osborne, as she remembers it, probably appeared on June 4th. Mrs. Silver, the important thing is underlined, was shown a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald, at which time she stated she could not recognize the person in the picture as the person who placed the order for the handbills. So once again, we have the most interesting phenomenon in the case, I suppose. The way it continues to develop, it's much more than I... Did you have that for your list, the Jones Printing Company?
Yeah, you got that one.
I don't have Jones, I got the memo, I just don't have it on here.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean on the client.
What's the date of that?
The date of that is Oswald's here, but she can't identify his picture. And this is June 1963.
8677.
She picks two as possible, Thornley and Oswald. Although she says Thornley's face appears more full. I don't know which picture she was shown. Okay. Douglas Jones. We've had the woman who was employed at Jones Printing Company. Now there's Douglas Jones, the owner.
We'll have to give us a second to find out.
Oh, okay. I'm just happened to mark myself. I asked Fraser to review his relationship with Carrie Thornley. That's the point here. Fraser said that he, Fraser, used to attend a discussion group on Friday nights at 514 Bourbon. The Ryder Coffee House is, I'm pretty sure, on 700 Rampart, even though they don't seem to mention it at this point. Some of the people who attended the discussions were Carrie Thornley, William Brady, Helen Gladstone, the close friends of Brady's, Jack Burnsides, and Ross Buckley. The person who held the discussion is a man named Ivan, homosexual. Fraser said Brady was also homosexual. Fraser said politics occupied the bulk of the discussions, and Carrie Thornley was an active participant in the group. Fraser said that he was gone on a trip when Brady was picked up on a morals charge and later deported to the Philippines. Brady's deportation occurred around the same time as Oswald's leaflet distribution episode. As you point out, there were several, but the most publicized was the one in August at the International Trade Mart, so that's probably that one. And Fraser thinks there may be some connection. Well, that may or may not be true, but he thinks so. He goes on to say, Fraser said, I think that Brady was deported because the CIA wanted him out of town. I don't know what that means. Brady and Ross Buckley, probably related to some activity with Cubans or something, the founders of Citizens for Free Cuba, used to hold press conferences and release statements denouncing President Kennedy for his Cuban policy. Interesting little group.
Jack, this has all been called to LJ's attention, so I can just scan it. Burnside's maybe a lead to Thornley, knew him quite well. Arnold Eklund knows some of the people. Frazier also mentioned the man, Bernie Goldsmith, who was supposed to have made a statement that he saw Lee Oswald and carried Thornley together, or Thornley had mentioned that Oswald was in town. Goldsmith knows William Brady very well and now works at Tulane University. That's worth checking out, but that's been called to LJ's attention, so I guess it was followed through. In fact, it went to a specific level. Okay, let's take care of that one. Now we'll go to interview.
Next line, it shows you how he contacted him. He contacted Goldsmith.
Yeah. He's got that. Next, we'll take a look at Daphne Stapleton. While I'm getting some coffee, just start reading the third paragraph while I get some coffee. Daphne Stapleton told me, this is Andrew Samba, one of our top investigators, who's one of our attorneys. Daphne Stapleton told me she met Lee Harvey Oswald one time. She said she was standing in front of the Ryder Coffee House when Lee Harvey Oswald walked up to her and asked, is Jack here? She said the Jack that Lee Harvey Oswald was referring to was Jack Frazier. She told Oswald that Frazier was not around at the time but would probably be back later on. She said that Oswald then wrote his name on a piece of paper and said to give the paper to Jack. She said she took the paper, read the name, which was Lee Oswald, and she put the paper in a book she had in her hand. I'm reading the Daphne Stapleton thing, but I think you're familiar with the Ryder Coffee House thing. You made your own notes to follow up. Okay. She said she either gave the paper to Jack Frazier when he came back, or she merely told him that Oswald was looking for him. She said that after she told Oswald that Frazier was not around, he walked past her and went to Howard Cohen's apartment. Evidently, Cohen was not in because a short while later, Oswald passed her on the steps as he was coming back from Cohen's apartment. Oswald stopped and helped her catch a little cat which had gotten away from her. Daphne said as best as she can remember, a woman drove Oswald up to the Ryder Coffee House, an elderly woman with gray hair in her 40s. Let's see what else. Again, the Nina Soldier comes up, or maybe again because we're reading it again. After the assassination, Schulzer left for Florida and told Daphne not to talk to anyone about Lee Harvey Oswald. And here are some names in the second paragraph on the second page for LJ. Feels very strongly that Cowan would have a lot of information about Lee Harvey Oswald. Now make a note for you to check out when you talk to Jack Frazier. I haven't had a chance to check it out, but I came across it just in some digging on the side. That Cowan and Jack Frazier, I think it was right after the assassination, but it's rather odd. I think he spells it C-O-H-E-N anyway, but he made a trip to Mexico with Jack Frazier, which Jack Frazier never mentioned to us. It was in 63 sometime. Frazier and Cohen, C-O-H-E-N, made a trip to Mexico in 63. And I can't remember the details, but I noticed going back to Frazier's statements that he had never mentioned it. So it might be productive somewhere. I asked, too many people going to Mexico in 63, not only Oswald, but even Thornley admits it. I asked Daphne what information she gave to Dave Snyder of the States Item, and she said not much. She said Snyder told her that he wanted to talk to her because the States Item was going to prove that Garrison did not have a case and all his incident was a witch hunt. Concluding line, it is interesting to recall Tommy Bumler's remark to Barbara Reed that if the DA's office wants to find out about Lee Harvey Oswald, they should look into his activities around the Ryder Coffee House. The only significance about Tommy Bumler is he's another character. He became a lawyer eventually, who hung around the Bannister office for a little while. He saw a few things. Doesn't seem to have been too significant, but anyway, we're still in the Ryder Coffee House. There's an interview by James Alcock, who was my chief assistant somewhere about that time, shortly after, with a guy named Robert Carno, whose name is on the list of visitors to the Ryder Coffee House. Now, I don't have this underlined. The underlining didn't come through clearly, but halfway down the page, Robert Carno corroborates Daphne Stapleton in effect, and with regard to Oswald being at the Ryder Coffee House. Alcott, now let me ask you this. Did you ever meet Oswald here in the city? Well, I believe I did. I'm most sure I did, twice. Alcott, do you want to tell me about the occasions and the persons you think or thought was Oswald? Once at the Ryder Coffee House on Rampart Street, 700 block of Rampart. And that was in the last part of the summer or September of 1963. What makes you think it was Oswald? I was considering myself at the time a writer, and I was talking to a lot of people, and he did mention that his name was Lee, and I thought I remembered it was Oswald, the last name. When you saw the pictures after the assassination, did it recall? Not right away, I'd say the second day it did. Now, the meeting you had with the Ryder Coffee House, was that the first meeting or the second? It was the first. Do you recall what you were doing? Well, anyway, to go on, you can read the rest later on at your leisure, but on page 3, he mentions that the bartender at the place, Ryder Coffee House, was Jack Frazier. And then on page 4, which confirms that he did indeed see Oswald in terms of probability. On page 1, you'll notice he seems to be a little cautious, but I think that's a case of an honest witness just being careful, because now he's asked about the second time he saw Oswald. But you say you mentioned his name was Lee, and you feel he might have said Oswald, something like that, because I met him later. Where did you meet him later? At the public library. Where? Napoleon and Magazine. That's the one where Oswald went frequently, because it was just around a few blocks away from where he lived. So let's see if there's anything else there that essentially amounts to corroboration of Stapleton. Thornley. Now here's the fellow.
Page 14.
Yeah, page 14. Remember, the whole point of the Ryder Coffee House is a situation that puts Kerry Thornley and Lee Oswald as visitors to this odd little place. Oswald has apparently been there. Now, we know Thornley's been there, but he also. Do you know Kerry Thornley? I thought you'd bring that up. I've met him twice. Where did you meet him? Once. Now, the first time I may not be sure of. I thought I met him once before at the Bourbon House with Roger Lovin, because I thought he introduced me to him, because at the time he was writing something. Now, this had to be in 63 or 64, probably 63. Yeah, it would definitely be in 63, blah, blah, blah. And a little down here, he says about more, oh yeah, Thornley comes over to his house. This is interesting. Thornley comes over. He came over to my house for something else, to find out if I had ever met him before. This is very much like David Ferry, after the assassination, going to neighbors of Oswald's and asking them if they ever saw Oswald's, the library card Oswald was using, and whose name was on it. Thornley comes over after the assassination, just a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact. It's in 1968. Thornley comes over to Carno's house. It's in 1968. He came over to your house to find out if he'd ever met him somewhere before. Yeah. Alone? No, with Slim Brooks. He asked you if you had met him before? Carno, yeah, and I thought I had at first, but now I'm kind of confused if I did meet him at the Bourbon House, but I think I did because if this is the same person, he had a briefcase and he was writing something. At the same time I was also, and we discussed poetry and writing stories and that stuff. That's the essence of the thing. The main point of the Ryder Coffee House is it's another apparent connection, although a light one, between Thornley and Oswald. And of course, you know that Thornley's testimony before the Warren Commission is that he didn't even know Oswald was in this part of town. So that's where I've got a stack of stuff related to Thornley on the floor, but that ends